September 12, 2008. Hurricane Ike is 12 hours from the Texas coast. The National Weather Service issues a bulletin unlike any in its history. Residents of low-lying areas who have not heeded evacuation orders, in single-family 1- or 2-story homes, it says, face certain death from the overnight storm surge. Ike at that moment is a Category 2, 110 miles per hour of sustained wind. The Saffir-Simpson scale places Category 2 in the range of significant but survivable damage. Residents along the Texas Panhandle coast have heard that designation before. In 2005, they watched Hurricane Rita approach as a Category 5, fled the city in one of the largest urban evacuations in American history, and came home to find their neighborhoods largely intact. The storm had tracked east. The damage was elsewhere. An estimated 25 to 40% of Galveston Island's population stays for Ike. Ike makes landfall at 2:10 in the morning on September 13th over the east end of Galveston Island. Maximum sustained winds, 110 miles per hour. Storm surge on the Bolivar Peninsula, east of Galveston Bay, 15 to 20 feet above mean sea level. The surge arrives before the eye wall. It arrives in the dark. It arrives in a place where ground elevation averages 5 to 6 feet. Ike was a Category 2. The surge it produced was not. Houston sits 50 miles inland from the Gulf of Mexico, separated from open water by a chain of barrier islands and the broad, shallow basin of Galveston Bay. This geography is the reason Houston became the 4th largest city in the United States. The bay provided a sheltered port. The barrier islands, Galveston to the south, the Bolivar Peninsula to the east, absorbed the energy of Gulf storms before they reached the urban core. The geography that made Houston economically viable also defined the terms of its exposure. Galveston Bay is approximately 30 miles long, 15 miles wide, and 9 feet deep on average. It connects to the Gulf through 2 relatively narrow gaps: the main pass at the eastern tip of Galveston Island, and Bolivar Roads, the channel between the island and the peninsula. When a large storm pushes surge northward from the Gulf, water enters the bay through those gaps and has nowhere to go but inland. The bay's enclosed geometry does not allow surge water to dissipate outward. It accumulates. It backs up into every bayou, every inlet, every drainage canal that connects to it. The Houston Ship Channel runs 50 miles from Galveston Bay inland to the Port of Houston, the busiest port in the United States by tonnage, handling a quarter of the nation's petrochemical output. Refineries, chemical plants, tank farms, and processing facilities line both banks of the channel for its entire length. In a surge event that pushes bay water up the channel, the industrial corridor does not merely flood. It becomes a pathway for contaminated water moving through the most concentrated petrochemical infrastructure in the Western Hemisphere. The Bolivar Peninsula presented a more immediate vulnerability. The peninsula is a narrow strip of land, in places less than a mile wide, running east from the entrance to Galveston Bay along the Gulf Coast. Its average elevation is 5 to 6 feet above sea level. It had no seawall. Its residential development, tens of thousands of homes built across decades as a beach and retirement community, sat directly on that low terrain with the Gulf to the south and the bay to the north. In a surge event from the right front quadrant of a landfalling storm, the water would come from both directions simultaneously. On the mainland behind Galveston Island and the Bolivar Peninsula, the coastal plain runs flat toward Houston. The bayou network, Brays Bayou, Buffalo Bayou, White Oak Bayou, carries stormwater east toward the bay during heavy rain events. In a major surge, the process reverses. Bay water pushes west through the bayou channels into neighborhoods miles from the coast that no local flood model had classified as surge risk zones. The same drainage infrastructure designed to protect Houston from rainfall becomes a conduit for the Gulf. Every element of this geography had been documented. The Army Corps of Engineers, the Harris County Flood Control District, and the Speed Center at Rice University had produced surge modeling studies that showed precisely what a major landfalling hurricane would do to Galveston Bay and the Ship Channel. The models existed. The geometry had not changed. The benchmark for the Houston-Galveston region was not set by the last major hurricane to cause widespread destruction. It was set by the last major evacuation, and what that evacuation did to the people who obeyed it. Hurricane Rita made landfall near the Texas-Louisiana border on September 24, 2005, as a Category 3. It was not a direct hit on Houston. The threat was sufficient to trigger the evacuation of an estimated 2.5 to 3.5 million people from the Houston metropolitan area, the largest urban evacuation in American history. Interstates 10 and 45 locked into gridlock that extended for more than 100 miles. Travel times of 24 hours or more were documented for distances that normally took 2 hours. Fuel ran out on the highway. Heat indices exceeded 100 degrees. People sat in their cars in standstill traffic in conditions that killed dozens from heat stress. On Interstate 45 near Wilmer, a motor coach carrying 44 nursing home residents and staff from a Bel Air assisted living facility caught fire after 15 hours on the road. A wheel-bearing failure ignited the blaze. Oxygen tanks carried by residents accelerated it. 23 people died in the fire. The bus, a charred skeleton on the shoulder of a stopped freeway, became one of the defining images of the Rita evacuation. In total, approximately 107 deaths were associated with the Rita evacuation in Texas, far more than the storm itself caused. Rita struck a largely depopulated coastline. The communities that had emptied survived. The people who had left were the ones who died. This was the ceiling Rita set, not a construction standard, not a flood benchmark, a behavioral one. Surveys of Houston area residents conducted after Rita and before Ike consistently found that evacuation trauma was a primary factor in compliance decisions. Respondents described sitting on I-45 for 18 hours, running out of gas, watching someone have a medical emergency with no ambulance able to reach them. They said they would not do it again for a Category 2. They meant it. Harris County and Galveston County emergency managers understood this when Ike approached. They issued mandatory evacuation orders for the highest risk zones on September 11th and 12th. Contraflow was activated on I-45 northbound. The orders were as clear as orders can be. An estimated 140,000 people in the danger zones did not comply. The Rita Ceiling did not mean those residents were irrational. It meant they were making decisions based on the last time they had been told to leave. Ike develops from a tropical wave off the west coast of Africa in late August 2008. By September 1st, it is a tropical storm. By September 4th, over the open Atlantic, it reaches Category 4 intensity, with 145 miles per hour of sustained wind and a central pressure of 935 millibars. It enters the Caribbean, crosses Cuba, and weakens over land before entering the Gulf of Mexico. What it carries into the Gulf is not its peak intensity, it is its size. Ike's diameter at Gulf entry is approximately 600 miles. Tropical storm force winds extend 275 miles from the center in some directions. Hurricane force winds extend 190 miles. This is a storm whose outer circulation covers an area roughly the size of Texas. As it moves northwest toward the Texas coast, it is pushing a column of Gulf water that wide ahead of it. The Saffir-Simpson wind scale measures maximum sustained wind speed at the storm's center. It does not measure size. A compact Category 3 and a sprawling Category 2 the size of a continent can look identical on the scale and produce categorically different surge events, because surge is generated by the total fetch of wind pushing water over distance and time. Ike's fetch is 600 miles wide. The water has been moving ahead of the storm for days. The National Hurricane Center's surge forecast is accurate. The certain death language in the September 12th bulletin reflects the actual projected surge height for the Bolivar Peninsula and the low-lying areas north of Galveston Island. Not an overstatement, not a worst-case outlier. The disconnect is between the warning and the Category 2 designation displayed alongside it. Residents see Category 2. They do not have an intuitive way to convert 600 miles wide into surge height. The number says manageable. The geometry says otherwise. Ike makes landfall at 2:10 a.m. on September 13, 2008, its eye centered over the east end of Galveston Island. The surge has already been rising for more than 24 hours. NOS tide gauges recorded water levels along the Texas coast beginning to rise rapidly on September 12th, a full day before the eye arrives. By the evening of September 12th, 6 to 8 hours before landfall, storm tides are already running near 8 feet in the vicinity of Galveston. Evacuation routes from the Bolivar Peninsula are flooded and closed. Some residents who intended to leave can no longer do so. The surge on the Bolivar Peninsula reaches 15 to 20 feet. The Galveston seawall, 17 feet high, built after the 1900 hurricane that killed at least 6,000 people, holds against the Gulf side surge. On the bay side of Galveston Island, water rises to 5 feet or more. The ship channel fills. The bayou networks reverse. By mid-morning, areas of the Houston metro that have never flooded from surge are taking water from the east. 150 tankers, cargo vessels, and container ships sit anchored offshore, unable to enter the Houston ship channel. 90% of the channel's navigational markers have been destroyed or displaced. The Coast Guard begins survey operations the morning after landfall. The Bolivar Peninsula in the hours before landfall is a place where some residents have tried to leave and found the roads already underwater, and others have decided to stay in structures they believe can hold. The surge does not distinguish between them. It moves across the peninsula from both sides simultaneously, Gulf water from the south, bay water rising from the north, until the narrow strip of land between them is simply covered. Communities along the western length of the peninsula, Crystal Beach, Gilchrist, and the area surrounding Rollover Pass, are catastrophically destroyed. In Gilchrist, almost every structure is swept from its foundation. The debris field extends into Galveston Bay. A handful of elevated homes survive. The rest of the streetscape is erased. Rescue teams conducting aerial surveys the morning after the storm document blocks where the slabs have been scoured clean. Not just the structures gone, but the concrete pads beneath them shifted or fractured by the surge's lateral force. Chief Warrant Officer Robert Gollier, Navigation Officer for Coast Guard Sector Houston-Galveston, returns to his station in Galveston the morning after landfall and immediately puts boats on the water to survey the ship channel. He sets up a cot and a coffee maker and begins working through the assessment. 90% of the channel's aids to navigation, buoys, markers, lights, have been destroyed or displaced by the storm. Without them, a 50-mile channel carrying some of the largest tankers in the world cannot safely operate. Gollier's team begins the systematic process of resurveying and repositioning every marker from the bay entrance to the port of Houston. In Galveston, the seawall holds on the Gulf side. On the bay side, the northern edge of the island, surge rises to levels that flood downtown. 6 feet of water moves through the Galveston County Courthouse, the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston, the primary trauma hospital for the region, takes significant flooding damage. Residents who sheltered on the upper floors of 2-story structures on the Gulf side survive. Those who sheltered in single-story homes on the bay side of the island, where the seawall provides no protection, face the surge the bulletin had warned about. In Houston, 50 miles from the landfall, the storm's winds knock out power across the metro. Had Ike's track shifted 30 miles to the west, the dirty side surge would have pushed directly up the ship channel into the industrial complex. The modeling for that scenario shows surge heights of 18 to 20 feet reaching the refinery corridor. Ike basically missed the Houston industrial complex. The miss was 30 miles. 84 people die in Texas directly or indirectly from Hurricane Ike. 113 deaths are reported across the United States in total. At least 16 people in the Galveston area remain unaccounted for as of 2011. Damage in the United States reaches $30 billion. The storm is among the 3 costliest Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded at the time of its landfall, alongside Katrina and Andrew. 2.6 million customers in Texas and Louisiana lose power. In some Harris County corridors, full restoration takes more than 3 weeks. Houston issues its first citywide curfew. More than 100,000 structures in Harris County sustain wind damage. On the Bolivar Peninsula, an estimated 80% or more of structures are destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. Communities including Crystal Beach and Gilchrist are functionally erased. Recovery and rebuilding on the peninsula proceeds slowly across the following years, with a permanent population substantially smaller than before the storm. The Ike Dike, formerly the Coastal Texas Protection and Restoration Study, a proposed surge barrier system running along the Galveston Island coastline and gating the entrance to Galveston Bay, receives federal authorization in 2021 after more than a decade of engineering studies. Construction is ongoing. The Houston Ship Channel remains without a surge barrier. The 150 vessels anchored offshore when the channel closed begin moving again once the Coast Guard completes navigational restoration. The petrochemical corridor resumes partial operations within days, though some facilities sustain damage requiring extended repairs. The brief disruption to refinery output is sufficient to drive fuel price spikes across the southeast and mid-Atlantic states. The Saffir-Simpson scale was designed to communicate wind damage risk. It does not communicate surge. The National Hurricane Center understood this problem clearly before Ike arrived. The Certain Death Bulletin was an attempt to work around the scale's limitation in real time, to communicate surge severity without a formal surge category to place it in. After Ike, the NHC began developing a separate storm surge warning product independent of the wind speed category system. The product was implemented in 2017. The Rita evacuation had made compliance harder. The Category 2 designation had made the surge harder to communicate. Together, they placed residents on the Bolivar Peninsula in structures that could not survive what arrived, without a clear framework for understanding why the number on the forecast said one thing and the water said another. Ike's dirty side struck east of the bay. The ship channel took flooding, but not the surge that the 30 miles west scenario would have produced. The Ike Dike is being built partly as an answer to that scenario, the storm that takes the track Ike didn't. The bay is still 9 feet deep. The peninsula is still 5 feet above sea level. The ship channel is still 50 miles long, and the Gulf of Mexico is warmer now than it was on September 13, 2008.